The Suez Canal, a critical waterway connecting Asia and Europe, served as the lifeline for the British Empire during World War II. As the shortest sea route between the East and West, it was vital for the transport of oil, fuel, weapons, and troops for the Allied forces. Realizing this, Adolf Hitler and his high command devised a plan to sever the Allies' supply line by capturing the canal. Entrusted with this mission was Hitler's most talented and cunning field marshal, General Erwin Rommel, famously dubbed the Desert Fox. Beginning in 1941, Rommel led the German Afrika Korps through a series of strategic victories across North Africa, successfully defeating British forces in Libya and pushing them eastward toward Egypt. At the height of his campaign, Rommel had extended German control from Libya all the way to the outskirts of Egypt. The British, meanwhile, scrambled to protect the Suez Canal and prevent its fall into Axis hands. This led to their establishment of a defensive line near a small Egyptian town named El Alamein, strategically located between the Mediterranean Sea and the impassable Qattara Depression, a natural barrier that prevented Rommel's forces from maneuvering around the British flanks. The terrain thus forced the Axis and Allied forces into a narrow battlefront, where tactics, logistics, and firepower would determine the outcome. Despite his battlefield brilliance, Rommel was increasingly handicapped by dwindling supplies. British codebreakers had successfully intercepted and decrypted German communications, allowing the Royal Navy and Air Force to intercept most of Rommel's supply convoys from Italy. Consequently, the Desert Fox faced shortages of fuel, food, and ammunition, while the British, receiving reinforcements and supplies via the very canal they sought to defend, grew stronger. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, deeply concerned about the deteriorating situation in North Africa, replaced his commander with the meticulous and determined General Bernard Montgomery. Under Montgomery, the British Eighth Army prepared to halt Rommel's advance once and for all. In July 1942, Rommel launched a major assault on the El Alamein front, hoping to outflank the British defenses near the Qattara Depression. However, Montgomery had anticipated the move thanks to superior intelligence and positioned his forces strategically around a small mountain range. British artillery and the Royal Air Force hammered Rommel's advancing tanks, which had little cover in the barren desert. Although a sudden sandstorm briefly allowed German tanks to penetrate British lines, they failed to break through completely. With dwindling fuel reserves and mounting losses, Rommel was forced to withdraw on September 5, 1942, marking the end of the First Battle of El Alamein. This withdrawal, while tactically necessary for Rommel to conserve fuel and avoid a rout, left the battlefield undecided and the threat to the Suez Canal still looming. Though Montgomery's forces had held the line, they suffered significant casualties and equipment losses. Nonetheless, the morale of the British Army surged as fresh reinforcements, particularly American Sherman tanks, arrived in the region. These tanks, with their superior armor and firepower, tilted the balance in the Allies' favor. The Sherman's thick hulls made them difficult to disable, and their guns could destroy German panzer tanks with fewer hits. As Montgomery prepared for a renewed offensive, Rommel, gravely ill with high blood pressure and gastrointestinal issues, requested medical leave and returned to Germany. His absence left a critical void in German leadership, filled by General George Stumm, whose competence fell short of Rommel's tactical prowess. Before his departure, Rommel ordered the construction of a massive, layered minefield defense system called the Devil's Gardens, consisting of over 500,000 anti-tank mines laid across narrow corridors, backed by defensive posts and secret Axis supply paths. Montgomery's next move would be a combination of tactical deception and overwhelming force to breach this mine-laden front and decisively turn the tide of war in North Africa. In October 1942, with Rommel still on medical leave and General Stumm in command, General Montgomery launched Operation Bertram, a brilliant deception strategy designed to mislead German forces about the location of the next major assault. British forces created dummy tanks, fake fuel depots, and bogus supply lines in the southern sector of the battlefield, convincing the Axis commanders that the attack would come from that direction. Meanwhile, Montgomery secretly moved his actual tank divisions to the northern sector, camouflaging them to look like trucks. With the German focus fixed on the wrong location, the British launched Operation Lightfoot on the night of October 23, 1942. This operation was so named because the infantry had to cross the heavily mined Devil's Gardens on foot. Many of the mines would only be triggered by heavy vehicles. The goal was for the infantry to clear paths through the mines, after which engineers would widen the corridors to allow tank passage. The assault began with a massive artillery barrage from more than 800 guns, shaking German positions and initiating the infantry advance. However, the initial stages of Lightfoot quickly turned chaotic. As the British infantry moved through the minefields, many units became disoriented in the darkness and were met with fierce German resistance. The narrow cleared paths through the mines created choke points for British tanks, which were subsequently targeted and destroyed by German artillery. This caused traffic jams of stalled tanks, leaving them vulnerable to concentrated fire. The battlefield soon became a graveyard of metal, with dozens of tanks immobilized amid the mines. By dawn, the British had failed to achieve a breakthrough. The operation had cost them dearly in both men and machines. In response to the Allied offensive, Rommel, summoned urgently back to Egypt, resumed command and temporarily restored discipline and morale within his ranks. The Germans had successfully repelled the British assault, and Rommel's return injected new hope into the Axis lines. However, the numerical disadvantage remained stark. The British and Commonwealth forces numbered 220,000 men with over 1,000 tanks, while Rommel's forces had only 116,000 soldiers and fewer than 550 tanks. Montgomery, unfazed by the setback, quickly regrouped and began preparations for Operation Supercharge, a second offensive designed to crush Rommel's defenses through sheer force and perseverance. Learning from the mistakes of Lightfoot, Montgomery emphasized the need to maintain pressure and avoid any retreat. The key change was a determined plan to overwhelm the German lines before they could reallocate their defensive units. To distract Rommel, the British launched diversionary attacks in the south, prompting the German commander to shift his reserves in that direction. Meanwhile, Montgomery struck again in the north, where the original Lightfoot offensive had occurred. This time, the British infantry pushed quickly through the minefields and gained a solid foothold in the enemy's second line of defense before dawn. Once again, mine-clearing teams opened narrow corridors for tanks, but German artillery shelled the pathways relentlessly. Many tanks were destroyed in the early stages, but more poured in behind them. The intensity of the British assault forced the German lines to collapse in places, and with resources dwindling, Rommel had little choice but to commit his last tanks to a desperate counterattack. Despite fierce resistance, the tide had decisively turned. The British Sherman tanks proved superior, while German supply lines had been stretched to the breaking point. Rommel's forces began to falter under relentless pressure. Realizing the untenable situation, Rommel appealed to Hitler for permission to retreat. Hitler, however, denied the request and ordered Rommel to stand and fight to the last man. Facing annihilation, Rommel made the controversial decision to disobey Hitler's orders. On November 5th, he initiated a retreat toward Libya without authorization. He prioritized evacuating German troops, leaving behind thousands of Italian and anti-tank soldiers to delay the Allied advance. These rearguard units resisted bravely, but were eventually overwhelmed, taken prisoner, or destroyed. The Second Battle of El Alamein ended with a clear British victory. While Allied casualties exceeded 13,500 with the loss of over 330 tanks, Axis losses were catastrophic. Nearly 7,000 men, hundreds of tanks, and countless artillery pieces were lost. The victory secured the Suez Canal and marked a decisive turning point in the North African campaign. The consequences of the British victory at El Alamein were far-reaching and transformative for the Allied cause. With Axis forces in full retreat, General Montgomery's troops advanced westward into Libya, capturing territory once held by Rommel's Afrika Korps. Though Rommel skillfully withdrew his forces to avoid complete annihilation, the Axis position in North Africa had become increasingly untenable. Meanwhile, on the western edge of the continent, the Allied powers launched Operation Torch in November 1942, landing thousands of British and American troops in Algeria and Morocco. These new forces, under the joint command of U.S. General Dwight D. Eisenhower and British commanders, quickly gained control of the region and pushed eastward into Tunisia. Caught between Montgomery's 8th Army advancing from the east and Allied forces moving in from the west, Axis troops in North Africa found themselves surrounded. By May 1943, over 250,000 German and Italian soldiers had surrendered in Tunisia, effectively ending Axis presence on the African continent. This comprehensive defeat had enormous strategic implications. The Allied forces now controlled the Mediterranean and could use North Africa as a springboard for invasions into Europe. The next logical step was the invasion of Italy, a key member of the Axis alliance. In July 1943, British and American troops invaded the island of Sicily, followed by a mainland assault in September. Within months, Italy's fascist regime under Benito Mussolini collapsed, and Italy formally surrendered to the Allies. German troops, however, continued to resist fiercely in northern Italy. Still, the loss of Italian support further weakened Hitler's strategic position. Meanwhile, Allied forces gathered in Britain in preparation for a massive amphibious assault on German-occupied France. This would become the infamous D-Day invasion of Normandy, scheduled for June 6, 1944. Once again, General Bernard Montgomery played a pivotal role in planning and leading the ground assault. In a poetic twist of history, Field Marshal Rommel was tasked by Hitler to defend the French coastline from this imminent Allied invasion. Thus, the two legendary commanders, who had clashed in the deserts of North Africa, were destined to face each other again, this time in the hedgerows and beaches of France. Rommel, now commanding the Atlantic Wall, made significant improvements to coastal defenses, planting thousands of mines and constructing fortified positions. However, his efforts were hampered by disagreements with Hitler and the rigid German high command. When D-Day finally arrived, the Allies executed a stunningly successful amphibious assault across 5 beaches in Normandy. Despite fierce resistance, they managed to establish a secure foothold, marking the beginning of the liberation of Western Europe. Rommel, increasingly disillusioned with Hitler's leadership, later became implicated in a plot to assassinate the Führer. Following the failure of the July 20, 1944 plot, Rommel was forced to commit suicide. Montgomery, on the other hand, continued to lead Allied forces throughout the European campaign, eventually helping to bring about the total defeat of Nazi Germany in May 1945. The Battle of El Alamein remains one of the most significant engagements of World War II, not only for halting the Axis advance in Africa, but also for symbolizing the shift in momentum toward the Allies. It showcased the power of superior logistics, intelligence, and deception in modern warfare and demonstrated how critical leadership decisions, such as Rommel's unauthorized retreat, can change the course of history.